Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Um, it's been, even though it's not been for you some time because this is going to be right after the next one. I was out for a week or two due to illness a little bit. You can hear my throat a little bit. Well, you don't notice it, but this is we're going to start where we left off, which was we're in the chapter on revolution or political change, metabole. In last chapter, in chapter two, he gave his general account in the sense is the model, the threefold model, the kind of causes, what causes change, what are the aspects of change. We talked about uh, the initial one, which is kind of the material cause argument, and then the next one was kind of what we call the final cause, and the last third part level was kind of like what you call the efficient cause or the triggering clause. I think that's kind of like the thing that caused, the thing that immediately that leads to it. And then just remember that this was that weird thing about the 7 and 11, and it ended on a kind of a list of the causes and starting points of changes. And then he said it was the 7, but then there was more, like 11. Okay, we got 11 ultimately. There is a difference between the first 7 and the 11. There's an argument to be made that the first 7 deals with a specific kind of change of direct stasis or conflict, whereas the latter are kind of less directly that way. I mean, that's a whole argument. This is highlighted. So I mean, this is one of those weird permits that the 7 or 11. We got the Newman suggests they're tied to different regime types. The difference. Other people suggest that it's like I said, the first 7 deal with explicit challenges, and the other ones are more kind of secondary and not as clear, right? Let's go. When I go over them again, you can do them as that said, like um, the first 2 spoken of earlier, but not in the same way. Profit and honor, not in order to acquire themselves, as was said earlier, but they are to see others aggrandizing themselves, or they're justly, respect to these things. Further, arrogance, fear, preeminence, contempt, disproportionate growth, and further, though in a minute, electioneering, underestimation, neglect of small things, and dissimilarity. Now, what 3 does is represents in more detail these 11 uh, starting points and beginning points of change, of metabole. Okay, why there is to change, why these things occur. So let's go through it. Of these things, the power, that arrogance. Now again, notice this: that he switches. There's a switch here, and that switches first. It's profit and honor, right? Here we go arrogance first, and then profit half. So what was third becomes first, and what is so profit, arrogance, profit, and in a sense, these are the causes, and it is fairly evident. So therefore, this is the idea that arrogance, people have arrogance and contempt for people, leads to them to want to resist them or to act against them, and profit they some benefit towards us. Right? This is evident, for it is those who are in office who have behave arrogantly and aggrandize themselves that men engage in stasis, factional conflict, both against one another and against the regime which provides them the license to do so. Aggrandizement occurs sometimes in the expense of at the expense of the private, sometimes at the expense of common funds. So then, someone has aggrandized themselves. Someone has done. This is next to aggrandizing themselves, made themselves better than. So therefore, we get to this. So arrogance. Now here, Lord has a note in 6. Um, he goes. The Greeks had a highly derived sense of arrogance, hubris. This is the word hubris, right? That needs to be kept in mind through discussion here. Hence, Aristotle has to say about it that this is from the rhetoric, right? That the man who is arrogant belittles his victim, For arrogance is doing and saying things which bring shame to the victim, not in order that something may come out of it for the doer, other than the mere fact that it happened, but so that he may get pleasure. The cause of the pleasure enjoyed by those who are arrogant is that they think that doing ill, they think that in doing ill they are themselves much superior. That is why the young and the wealthy are arrogant, for they think that in being arrogant they are superior. So this is why Aristotle is talking about arrogance, right? Arrogance and aggrandize is so huge, important. Aggrandizement, right? That clause, right? It is clear what the power of honor is, and in what sense it is the cause of factional conflict. Men engage in factional conflict both when they themselves are dishonored and when they see others honored. This occurs unjustifiably in cases where certain persons are either honored or dishonored contrary to their merits, or injustifiably in cases where um, it happens according to their merits. Right? It can happen justifiably and unjustifiably. They're either dishonest or honored based on the merits or this. Okay? So therefore, this is the idea. Now he says, so therefore we had this list. This is why the list here is actually very interesting. Right? This is why we get this shift of the first list and the second list, which I kind of highlight in my comments in my book. The guide book notebook on this. This is a very interesting thing. So arrogance is put forward, honor, and then fourth is preeminence. Right? Arrogance, profit, honor, and hence dishonor, the opposite of it. And remember, profit is also tied to loss, right? Cost, right? So that's the third here, right? Um, then there's factional covenant through preeminence, when a certain person or persons are greater in power than accords with the city and the power of the governing body, the Ptuma, right? From such person, there customarily arise a monarchy or the rule of the powerful, or dynastic rule. Dynastic rule. These great people, a monarchy will emerge, or a dynasty. This is rule of the powerful means dynastic here, and I think this is. I think he wish I didn't translate this as. I left it in the kind of Greek, which dynasty means a kind of. We know what it is, a dynasty. Um, Hence, in some places they have the custom of ostracism, as in Argos and Athens, for example. So therefore, this to prevent preeminence over people. I talk about, and we talked about this earlier in book 3, ostracism as a mechanism of dealing with this idea of preeminence. This is too great, too big, too powerful for both the city and the power of the governing body. In other words, if these people are so great that they have more power than the governing body, they are ruling really, not the governing body. Okay, it is better to see to it that from the beginning that no one is preeminent to such an extent, however, than to let them arise and heal the ill afterwards. Again, this is another very it's better to try to prevent that everyone becomes preeminent versus trying to fix it after it happens. Okay. Now, next, men engage in factional conflict, stasis, through fear, both when they have committed injustice and are frightened of paying the penalty, and when they're about to suffer injustice and wish to forestall it. And the example he gives is roads, right? He says, when the notables join together against the people on account of the suits being brought against them. 7 here is talks about that, and this is a reference to the oligarchical revolution that happened in Rhodes. Lords talks about um, through contempt as well. Through contempt, next is contempt, right? So we talked about fear, right? This is the fear. This is the fifth. Now sixth is contempt, which again, this stays the same in the same thing. Whereas when fear switches with preeminence, the two accounts, the preeminence and fear switch places. So this is interesting. Arrogance goes in the second account. Arrogance goes to the top, is the first. Profit and honor stay in the same order but move down. Then preeminence, which is fifth in the original list, now becomes fourth. And then fear, which was fourth, becomes fifth. Yeah. Okay. Now contempt, which is the sixth, and this is the same level, and through contempt as well, men engage in conflict and attack one another. In oligarchies, for example, when those not taking part in the regime are a majority, for they suppose themselves superior. In a democracy, when the well-off and the contemptuous are contemptuous of the disorder and anarchy. Right. This is again of contempt. In other words, that the powerful have contempt of the many, and this is an aspect of this, and also in Thebes, for example, democracy collapsed as a result of their being badly governed following the battle of Oenopedia, and the one at Megea through disorder and anarchy when they were defeated. And contempt was similarly aroused in Syracuse prior to the plot of the tyranny of Gleo, and by the people in Rhodes prior to the revolt of the notables. Now, 8 here is now some notes here. The Battle of Empedocles, 457. It's not known whether the democracy Thebes was replaced by an oligarchy that governed there during the Peloponnesian War. And Glion seized power in Syracuse at 491. It is not known what is the event of Megria is talked about, right? This is Lord's notes on this. Now, so therefore we ended with this idea of a discussion of contempt. Now we get disproportionate growth, which is the seventh on um, disproportionate growth. Now the second account, it's just mentioned originally as disproportionate growth. Now it's disproportionate growth of a part, right? Metobade, revolutions, but remember we talked about revolutions. Not revolutions as a political change, right? Change in regimes also occur through disproportionate growth of a part. A body is composed of parts, which much increase in proportion if a balance is to be maintained. So therefore, they needs to proportionally grow, right? And if this does not happen, it perishes. For example, when the foot is 4 yards long and the rest of the body is 2 feet, and sometimes it may be altered to the shape of another animal. If this increase is not only qualitative but quantitative, sorry, if this increase is not only quantitative but qualitative and contrary to proportion. So therefore, this can change the thing. In other words, the change of the part, the growth of the part, an disproportionate growth of the part may lead to the total change. If it's not just quantity, it's also quant, uh, qualitative, then that could lead to a change of the thing. Okay, and that's what he's trying to say. And this is true in regimes as well. Um, so to a city composed of parts, right? Uh, uh, and frequently an increase of one of them is overlooked. For example, the multitude of the poor in democracies and regimes. In other words, when they get too big and too powerful, they can change to more dramatical. In other words, the poor grow in number, and because the poor grow in number, the regime becomes more dramatically radical and more control. Right, the later democracies, more later forms of democracy that we counted in both in chapter 4, book 4, and chapter 6, book 4. Right, the four, five, four types of democracy. The last being the most radical and most like tyranny, right? Sometimes this happens also through chance occurrence. At Tertium, for example, democracy replaced a regime when many of the notables were defeated or killed by the Empedians prior to the Persian Wars. Again, this occurred at 423, and he goes see Herodotus, Dioclorus and or Herodotus talk about it. At Agora, when those of the 10th were killed by Cleomedes of Sparta, they were compelled to accept the regime some of their subjects. And now this is again, this is it probably refers to the day of the month on which the battle was fought, but the meaning is uncertain. Right? For the war of Clemos against Argos early in the 5th century, you see Herodotus, Book 6. Okay, so therefore this is, in other words, that and the notables became fewer as a result of the misfortune on land because they campaigned against the Spartan on the basis of their enrollment lists of citizens. Right, they fought that way, and during the Peloponnesian War, members of the Athenian army were drawn from the list of citizens of the wealthier class, while the navy was manned by the poorer citizens. In Aristotle time, the army consisted primarily of mercenaries. This is why this is what destroyed the army. War and the fight and the way they did it led to the destruction of the army, right? Because the hoplites, that's because the hoplite you need to have paid off armor. You had to pay for, while the ships, navy, didn't have armor. So therefore, it was the wealthier farmers the wealthier citizens who owned land and property could afford the armor, right? And therefore, and as they got killed in battle with the Spartans and land, they became less and less. And this is why the notables kind of things. And he says this happens in democracy as well, although in a lesser extent, when there comes to be more persons who are well off, right? Or when properties increase. They undergo a revolution and become oligarchy and regimes ruled by the dynastic regimes. Dynastic, not ruled by the powerful. Again, ruled by the powerful means dynasty. They become oligarchic and dynastic. Um, now, what does he mean by this? He's saying that what happens is that the wealth. We see this in America. What do you think what do you think the tech revolution and the bubble happened? We see this today, and how the elite universities of today are more oligarchic than ever, even the bad old days. Okay, there was more equality when only the wealthy used to go to Harvard than there is now at Harvard. Okay, because what happens is the people who come to Harvard are the best, and therefore they get the opportunities to become part of the 1% or 10%. Um, uh, Rather, a mere selection, a mere entry of that there, and therefore becomes more oligarchic, more dynastic in that sense. This is what he's talking about in that sense. Therefore, as this again through this a disproportionate growth of the wealthy. Now, Now he shifts to the next one, which is the eighth, electioneering, right? The last four types don't really switch. It's electioneering, underestimation, uh, s- small things, and dissimilarity, right? So let's go look at this in this way, which continues here. Um, Undergoing regimes undergo change without faction because there's no factional conflict. And that what he says seems to suggest. This is what I said. This seems to suggest through both electioneering, both through electioneering, as in Hela, where they had officials chosen by lot instead of election, because those engaging in electioneering were getting elected. Right. Uh, 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 I'll stop here just to get 12. Important to keep in mind that the selection to office by lot, not election, was regarded by the Greeks as characteristic of democracy. The term electioneering is rare and of certain meaning. In other words, eretia means striving for office. We understand this more. This is much rarer in the Greeks because most democratic societies were thing. This is someone striving for office, right? Election to get elected, to get chosen for office, right? And through underestimation, where they allow persons who are not friends of the regime to occupy the authoritative offices. And in other words, there's two ways. These regimes don't happen through factional conflict. One is, again, he says, because of electioneering, that someone gets in it and there's something happens that and they changed the rules because these people always get elected. These people, same people, get elected, and they said, I'm not going to like it anymore. Let's have lots. Okay, let's have lot. In other words, they shifted from chosen where they had the election chosen by lot rather than that because they were tired of same people getting offices. Right, that can lead to a change of the regime in that sense. He's saying that therefore wasn't done because of faction. Just that they didn't like the people who keep, or they didn't like the fact that the same people were kind of getting always elected. Right. That's the first one, and the second one is about the he says about underestimation that someone was put in there because they were underestimated. They were not a friend of the regime, right? In Ornis, for example, the monarchy was overthrown when uh, Heracleidos, her Acu-Doris, one of these wonderful Greek names, Hercules and Adoris, right? Hercules becomes one of the officials, right? One of the people in the ruling authoritative offices, the Duma, something very important to that, right? He instituted in the place of the oligarchy a regime. He says polite regime, or rather a democracy. Now, this is Lord has a note accepting the standard view of Kai as epiprexic, but something may be wrong here in the text. Okay, I think there is something wrong with it. It is democratic regime. I think it is not the regime or democracy, a democratic regime. Um, I think it might be the case, right? Because this is the case. Um, uh, um, Oronus, town in Euboea, revolted from the Spartans and joined the Second Athenian League. The change in the regime may have been connected with this event. If that's the case, it would have gone from an oligarchy to a democracy or something less oligarch, more less democratic to something more radically democratic, right? So that's why I think it's to the democratic regime, right? Further, regimes undergo revolution or change through neglect of small things. This is the small. It's not small differences. I don't like. It is. It is literally small things. Macro. The Greek is actually very specific here. In fact, I want to write on this a little bit because this small things is going to be very small things is kind of an interesting thing here. Now it only has a little passage here. It's just slightly mentioned earlier, but here we get a better mention here. Where is it? I want to just look at this for a second. Yeah, it's dimacroparte, uh, 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 and here in this line it's um, macron, small things, small things. I'm gonna take some water. Sorry. I apologize. My throat is so neglect of the small things. I mean, a great shift in usage often occurs unnoticed when a small thing is overlooked. Something small, something minor. In Ambracia, however, the assessment was small, and eventually they all came to hold the office with none at all. The assumption being that there was little or no difference between none and a small one. Right? This is, and he has nothing to know about this revolution. Um, Now, that's all he says here, but he will spend in the next chapter 4, he will spend a nice section of that discussion about expanding on small things. This is very interesting that he feels the need to next chapter really expand on this. Okay, so but now next similarity of stock. And I'm going to argue here what is only one item at the end of chapter 2 to similarity, right, to similarity, becomes 5 here. This has a fivefold character. Um, and I think it's very interesting to pay attention to this fivefold character here because tells us something first of stock, of the question of equality, of sharing equally or not sharing equally, question of inequality, inequality, the differences of similarity, location, the place of a place, and then virtue and depravity, and then last but wealth and poverty. So let's look at this passage. The similarity of stock also conducive to factional conflict until a cooperative spirit. So this similarity, Aristotle says that dissimilar. What does mean dissimilarity of stock? This means ethnicity. This is the difference between homogeneity and heterogeneity. Dissimilarity of stocks is the question of how homogeneous or how heterogeneous your community is, of ethnicity, race, ethnicity, which involves religion and cultural aspects, but also race. Okay. In other words, if the greater it is a great point, the more homogeneous you are, um, it's going to things that divide are going to be difficult. It's going to be more petty and smaller things. So, in other words, but when there's when there's heterogeneity, right? There's great heterogeneity, great difference between ethnic difference. Therefore, what will the obvious things like race and things like that, and ethnicity, different ethnicities, will will be a factor of division in the society, and particularly if they don't share the same interests, they're not together. And this is why he says until a cooperative spirit develops. Now, 15 here is until they draw the little language, until they draw breath together like horses in a harness. This is something that the text is literally is mean that they, in other words, not and therefore that I think I would wish he'd left the translation as it is, until they draw breath together and operate like a horse together, a team. They operate in a team that they know each other. This is this idea that until the community, until the parts of the community, the different groups, the different things act as one, and I don't even add have affection for each other, then there will be factional conflict, right? And that's the similarities. Until they have affection for one another, and to kind of be a team, they will act against regarding they will diverge and pursue their own interests. And this will cause the stasis in that sense, right? This would lead to conflict. For just in a city does not arise from any chance multitude, so it does not arise in any chance period of time. Hence, those who have admitted joint settlers or late settlers of different stock have, for the most part, split into factions. In other words, so you bring in people. If you bring in people joint stock, coming together with joint stock, it's gonna unless you got everyone to really get together, they're gonna fall into factions. You know, think of that. Think of Ireland and the rise of Protestants and Catholics, right? And the bringing of the Scots Irish into that, or the English into that, and that how this has led to factions in Ireland to this day. In fact, right? Again, this is the similarity of stock in that sense, right? Of this, and they get into factions. He says, for example, the Achaeans settled in Scabras jointly with the Theosan, but when the Achaeans came to be more numerous, they expelled the Theosans. This is what gave the rise to the curse of the Sarabites. Now, this is 16. Nothing is known of this event. This is presumably connected with the destruction of Sarabas in 510. So there was they probably sought revenge, right? These people came back and sought revenge. At Turlai, too, the Sarabites became involved in the factional conflict with whom they had settled it jointly with him. They claimed to merit aggrandizement on the grounds that the territory was theirs and were driven out. Right. This is again 17. This is this for this incident. See Diodotus, Diodorus Scilus at in book 12, a classic historic Greek history, and Strabo. These are historians that will give you accounts of this event. The latter were discovered. The latter were discovered conspiring against the Byzantines and were driven out after their battle. The as the Antisasians, expelled after the battle of the Chan exiles, they had admitted, right? The Xenoclasians were themselves driven out by the Samites. They had admitted. So therefore, this is 18. Let's go look at this. Nothing is known of the event in Basim and Adat. The factional conflict at Messalina, Zeal, was a result of the influx of refugees following the suppression of the revolt of the Ionians against Persian rule. This is dealt with um, uh, Heraclitus. Now, this is interesting to see this point here. Why? Because about examples are of mass, if you have a population change. So the mass influx of refugees into a place can create political crisis. Therefore, or even the illegal aliens in American South. Just think about this: as the illegal migration comes into mass migration comes in, this changes the character of the people. Oh my God! It's subversive. This is common sense. This is what's wrong with a lot of the world today. No common sense anymore about this. And Aristotle's talking about this is very dangerous. Therefore, if you're going to change the size of the population, you're going to create problems, and you have to understand that. You have to not be prepared for them. Okay, there might be a benefit towards it. The argument is, would you letting these people in for some benefit? Okay, yes, but every benefit or good thing has a cost. Everything has its price. Every cost has every benefit, every good thing has a cost. Cost, benefit, right? Benefit, cost, benefit, price. Everything has its price. The benefit and the price, right? And therefore, you have to look at this. Now, let's continue. He goes, and the Apodites, those on the Black Sea, fell into factional conflict after bringing the latter settlers, right? The Syracusans fell into a factional conflict and battled with one another when they made citizens of foreigners and mercenaries after the period of the tyrants. And the Amphipolitans, after admitting the latter settlers from the Chaldeans, were almost driven out by them, the Chaldeans, right? So again, 19 is a very interesting thing. Nothing is known of the event at Apulia. The reference to Syracuse belongs to the fall of the tyrant Thessalonus in 479, the expulsion of the original Ruthenian colonists at Amphipolis, and the incorporation of the city in the Chaldean Confederation probably occurred around 370. So again, this is examples. In oligarchies, in other words, those are the similarities. Now, in oligarchies, as was said, I switched now. Example of oligarchies. As was said earlier, many engage in factional conflict on the grounds that they are done an injustice because they do not partake of equal things in spite of being equal. In democracies, the notables engage in factional conflict because they partake of equal things, although they're not equal. Okay. So again, he says it seems to be out of place, and he thinks you should be moved to someplace else. I don't think so. I think this is not the case here. I think this is done purposely. This is about equality and inequality. In other words, this is the disproportionate of inequality and inequality, and how this threatens the regime. How this threatens this disproportionate growth. This disproportion. No, sorry, not this. I'm sorry. This is about. This is dissimilarity. In other words, in a democracy, there needs to be equal people. The notables are what? In a democracy, those engage in factional conflict because they partake of the equal things, although they're not equal. They don't feel they're equal, right? They're better. I don't want to be treated the same way as everyone else. I want more. In oligarchies, what happens is that they again, this happens that some people should be equal, should be treated the same, but aren't because they're not given equal same status. The wealthy, certain oligarchies, what happens is that maybe the richer people will say to the lesser rich people, "Oh no, you can't have it." Therefore, even though they're part of the regime and they're both oligarchs, they don't take part of equal things in spite of being equals. Okay, Again, that's the weird thing. This is equality and inequality here. Now, it goes into the next slide. Cities sometimes fall into factional conflict on account of location. When the territory is not naturally apt for there being a single city. So the location of it, that the location of the city, how it is geographically and designed that it's not really one city. It is really because of the layout, it becomes the different parts of the city kind of have different interests and different locks, and therefore that leads them to come into conflict with each other. He goes at Clamies, for example, those of the Critus engaged in fictional conflict against those on the island. So also the Cleo, Cleophosians and Notians, right? Critus is ever mainland is a mainland dependency of the city island of Cleonese. Nostrum was the port of Colophon. Nothing is known of what the events referred to. And these events refer to something. But he's saying that okay, one is an island, this is that, the Portland. Well, these things they will have different interests, and their interests might come to a point where they come to conflict. They don't share the same. They become different. Okay, and that leads to this is what he means by dissimilarity. They become their interests become dissimilar to each other, even because of location. The difference of location creates dissimilarity of what they need, what's beneficial, what's good for them, and therefore that leads to kind of a conflict right there, right? And then it goes at Athens too. There was a dissimilarity. Those living in the Piraeus are more popular than those living in the town. Okay, the town became more of the people who were the farmers, the landowners, and therefore the city the older part of Athens and Piraeus was tied to the sea, commerce, labor, more popular, more democratic. So therefore, the different parts of the city will have different economic interests and different activities, and therefore that will lead to difference, and that those differences can lead to faction disputes. Just as in the war, crossing of ditches, even if they're very small, splits apart the ranks. So every difference, it appears when it appears, makes a factional split. So anytime there's difference, the possibility for factional split emerges. Once you see any difference, so the reference here is that now this is all about the location, right? There's a split, there's a possibility. Like in war, it's if a trench happens, okay, that trench creates a split between the two sides, okay? It's location of and I think this is very much tied to location. And every difference that appears makes a faction, a possibility of a factional split, of a stasis. Now, the fifth case is the greatest faction stasis, the greatest type of stasis, right? Faction, is between that of this stasis division is between virtue and depravity, right? So that's the fourth, right? The next after that one, that's the fourth. Sorry, that's not fifth. So virtue and depravity, and then there's a difference between wealth and poverty. And so on, and the other, with the others in varying degrees, just as these being that just spoken of. In other words, that of again the other things that we talked about earlier. So he ends the thing about of dissimilarity on two other issues of dissimilarity, and again, like this is again the inequality, which is very interesting. The wealth and poverty at the end, right? Wealth and poverty echoes. It is substantially different. You think about women. It wasn't that about equality or unequal. No, it's this is actually material aspect. This is more material. What that is was about status, right? That was about status and you know, your position in the society. The earlier account, right? I think it's the second, right? Yeah, first is a stock. Two is equality, inequality. Third is about the territory. The fourth is we get the virtue and vice, the virtue and depravity. Doesn't he need, this is what he says. This, remember, virtue. Maybe we said earlier about virtue. People who are virtuous. These are the people. People who are virtuous have the most legitimate reason to engage in fact, but they don't often do it. They often don't do this, right? But this is an interesting thing that once there's a dissimilarity of virtue, it becomes very difficult. It becomes a difference here. I mean, it's both sides. Hate to say, no, people don't, if someone is so good and great, the rest of the society kind of looks at them and with envy and resentment. Okay. This is the danger of having someone who is so great and so powerful. This is what this is discussed. This was actually discussed in the problem of preeminence, and why um, this actually leads discussion here of this dissimilarity kind of leads to a preeminence in that sense. Okay, and that's why these things happen the way they do. And the last, like I said, it's again wealth and poverty, right? Wealth and poverty, and that's the five. The five sub. This is the expansion of the last 11th point in five dimensions, right? And this is how we end the discussion here. So we'll stop here. I have to report that I think I made it. I've been. If you like what you said here, you like it. I haven't seen any comments by anything so far. I've been waiting for people to say some comments on things, but there's no comments. If you have comments, questions, or things like this, please put them below, and when I see them, I'll answer them. You can, if you like it, share it with a friend, get others to join us. Please, this is the way to grow. I haven't been in, this haven't been growing, so I'm kind of a little worried. Um, if you dislike it, okay, dislike it, or say why I don't like it. So it would be useful. Um, Next, but not last, but not least, um, um, you can subscribe if you have not subscribed already. Subscribe. I'd like to grow the channel a little bit. Encourage others to subscribe. If you like this, please share on social media and share with friends. Either the individual section or thing, or even the whole series or other series. Um, Subscribing would be useful because to grow the channel a little bit more. If you want to follow me on social media, links are below. If you want to help and contribute, there's ways you can do this. Um, I'm starting to discover that I must have misunderstood Google. Google might have misled me about why they were charging things. So I'm again. I'm not. It's maybe. I'm not going to push. If you want to help, please help. This Patreon subscribe star, it would be useful. Um, so I can continue to do things with other people who do projects and things that'd be useful. So I actually could use the money. It's getting tight and more tight these days with the inflation and things. Another thing I can recommend is, like I pointed earlier, you can buy this book. That's one that can help me. This is a notebook in Aristotle's Politics by Lulu. It's available there direct. Links are below. You can get it at Amazon as well. But if you buy by Lulu, I make the money Amazon made. So it's a good guide. It's a study guide in this. It helps you go through it. It's not a commentary. It's not a really interpretation. It's kind of a guide to help you go through the politics, like Cliff's Notes, right? So that's it. Again, next time we meet, we'll look at chapter 4, which is kind of a finishing up of this thing, and it's interesting. It deals. It's kind of an appendix wrapping up this general theory. And therefore, take care, and